Good afternoon again. The connection between the three piano pieces by Arnold Schoenberg under Opus 11 may not be comparable to what happens in Brahms' Opus 116 compared by Kalbeck's to offsprings, as if one piece is contained into others. But they certainly belong together. We could consider Opus 11 as a story in three episodes, the first connected by the pause in quarter notes, the recurrent elements, and the feeling of familiarity being established through the piece. The second obviously connected by the ostinato, and the third sounding like a grand finale, one of the highlights among Schoenberg's piano work. Number 3 is the most controversial, and although there is no way to prove that it was meant to be like that, it's undeniable that it doesn't fit in any previously established form. Further investigation of previous manuscripts might lead us to confirm this line of thoughts, and Schoenberg himself gives us a hint, writing to Busoni. Apparently his intention was indeed not to have any intention. For performers, however, it's imperative to make sense out of this lack of intention, otherwise no performance is possible. There are these three concepts which will always support the performance building, in spite of how unusually the work may have been conceived, registered, or how strikingly modern it may sound. Form, constructed by repeated elements combined with new elements, even if it's an informal form, created by events or musical scenarios, established by the changing of musical elements organized within a certain tempo, conducted by a line of coherence. Tempo, established by the organization of events. Line of coherence, which leads the interpreter and later the public through the musical discourse. A fourth concept, which could be considered, is that of a structure, the skeleton of the piece. The term structure could sound controversial in this case, since it may imply hierarchical organization of elements, which is not present in this piece, where everything seems important. From this standpoint, we could think more in terms of recurrent elements. However, we will see that although there are no such hierarchy, the tempo humor changing factor delineates a certain structure, in the sense that it holds the piece together. The term skeleton suggests this idea. The recurrence relates not to specific elements which are repeated throughout the piece, but to the various events created by these changes of tempo humor, held by the pause in 8th note. Claude Alfer, a French pianist, shows a scheme based on tempo mood changing, which inspired the one shown in slide number 5, based on these most evident elements which hold the piece together, hence the term structure. So you see, the first striking thing when you try to make sense of the piece is the actual changing of moods directly related to the change of tempo. And you see that the very beginning has this like one mood, and then the actual lots of changing of moods, and then again you count down again in all this changing. Considering that the understanding and organization of the different musical events and possible recurrence within the adequate tempo establish the line of coherence, which will guide the interpreter through the musical message, and consequently her audience storytelling should be made possible out of the material presented by Schoenberg in this piece, which follows the two well-organized number 1 and 2, both with easily perceivable forms, with no lack of familiar and recurrent materials. Number 3 is not at all obvious, but it certainly makes more sense if hourly connected with the previous two. The first impression is that of an intentional act of rupture, with the traditional roots thoroughly present in the composer's background. After being so evocative of Brahms' style in the large phrases of number 2, with its wild exploration of the keyboard, also observed in number 1, with its changes of humor neatly organized by means of a meaningful sequence of events, aural connection sounding easily after a first approach of the score, Opus 11, number 3 sounds as a disconnection. Perhaps the good description of the effect of Opus 11, number 3, is the one provided by Adorno, who declares, when an unprejudiced person listens to early works of free atonality, for example, the especially aggressive third piece from Schoenberg, Opus 11, he is assailed by the feeling, if it can be thus described, of spacelessness, of two-dimensionality. Among the shocks that this music delivers, one of the ones that is surely of the essence in its denial for the listener of the feeling of inclusion, the spatial embrace. It sounds, to state it bluntly, like a beating. This probably accounts for the often remarked upon gesture of rejection in the works from Schoenberg's expressionist phase. These remarks justify our mentioning at this point Claude Heffer's beliefs when lecturing about this piece. Hence, here perhaps we can make a reference to Eero Taras's recent remarks about Schumann Opus 17 and the need of having some kind of relationship with Schlegel, output. So Claude Heffer believes, when lecturing about this piece, that the musician has to be cultivated in order to bring consistency to this work. Adorno's reference to Schoenberg's expressionist phase is perfectly related to the fact that at the time Opus 11 was composed, the composer was very interested on painting, which was reacting against the Impressionists. We have to mention the relationship between Schoenberg and Kandinsky, and also the fact that the first was in the middle of a personal crisis besides the war context. According to Hofers, in crisis atmosphere, we normally turn to the arts, but the public needs something traditional, rejecting anything new, like Mahler and Bruckner. Schoenberg is there in the middle of this crisis. As a first tentative, the pianist looks for familiar elements and recurrence of events or even cells. In this kind of searching, the recurrent 16 groups are the most obvious. They can be perceived as that familiar element which helps the performer to feel at home in some places during the piece, although they don't really work as the starting point to delineate some kind of line of coherence which leads our hearing through the piece. Here below, the 16 notes groups as they appear throughout the score in measures 1, of developing variation, which could be implied in this recurrent figure, doesn't apply to the piece, since there is no continuous development leading to a new musical idea. Our musical prose is not based on these 16 notes groups. However, two of his other concepts help us construct our performance. Phrasing is made possible by connecting different ideas suggested mainly by tempo changing in the mood implied by its indications. Bewegt, etwas langsamer, viel hascher, etwas langsamer, etc. As well as variation of rhythm, intervals, extension, intervals which enlarge itself and shrinks, like Alpha used to say, and register. Furthermore, from Schoenberg's standpoint, phrasing is solely connected to performance with the purpose of helping the audience to understand a piece of music. The performance is also a part of the task of presenting an idea. This kind of changes makes us conscious of the piece's center of gravity shifting, which he considers more important than knowing the way notes are joined. But ideas must be connected, and here again, tempo is most relevant. The 8th note indicated beside the bewegt in the beginning of the piece sets the connection. It's the pulse set to guide our hearing throughout the whole piece, accompanying the tempo changing in a coherent and stable way. It connects section and its internal events. Each different idea takes the time they need to be expressed in the indicated mood. Form, recurrent elements, free thematic development, and tempo conduct our hearing to a stage further from traditional ideas of motivic and thematic development, which characterize developing variation. It is a style of musical composition that privileges a continuous process of developing the musical material, or, in other words, musical prose. Schoenberg argues by showing asymmetrical phrases and structures in works of earlier composers such as, and in particular, Mozart and Brahms. Thus, for him, musical prose is related to the direct and continuous development of musical ideas. In a tentative definition, Schoenberg declares, "Great art must proceed to precision and brevity. It presupposes the alert mind of the uneducated listener who, in a single act of thinking, includes with every concept all associations pertaining to the complex. This enables a musician to write for upper-class minds, not only doing what grammar and idiom requires, but in other respects, lending into every sentence the full pregnancy of meaning of a maximum, of a proverb, of an aphorism. This is what musical prose should be, a direct and straightforward presentation of ideas without any patchwork, without mere padding and empty repetitions." Liberation from symmetric phrase structure seems to be one of the main products of this way of presenting the musical idea. An analogy can be established to language. Accordingly, those structures that are traditional, those that respect symmetrical construction, for example, would correspond to poetry, and those that conform to continuous development would correspond to prose. From another perspective, Schoenberg argues that these elements, independent from their type of construction, are not able to provide an aesthetic value for judgment. They provide the means for a musical coherence and the presentation of the musical idea only. The language in which musical ideas are expressed in tones parallels the language which expresses feelings or thoughts in words, and that its vocabulary must be proportionate to the intellect which is addressed, and in that the aforementioned elements of its organization functions like the rhyme, the rhythm, the meter, and the subdivision into strophe, sentence, paragraphs, chapters, etc. in poetry and prose. Schoenberg, in a sense, echoed Wagner's endless melody, which maintains that all notes in harmony and melody are of expressive importance, and praises the constant development of musical material. Dalhaus has argued that Wagner's ideas of endless melody had to be coherent, and that this coherence can be achieved only in that individual music events ought to proceed from each other. This idea discards the possibility of repetition, padding, and mere ornamental variation and points towards a continuous process of variation. However, Schoenberg understood developing variation and musical prose as being different ideas. The former expressed the idea of either a compositional method or a presentational idea, whilst the latter expressed the presentation of that method and is therefore its ultimate product. In addition, the final presentation of developing variation is variable, for it may or may not take the form of musical prose. In the present case, Opus 11, number 3, is presented in the form of musical prose. Illustrating once more our concept of connected disconnection, we could mention the many examples of musical prose Schoenberg shows in Brahms' The Progressive. Commentaries such as all units vary greatly in shape, size, and content, as if they were not motival parts of a melodic unit, but words, each of which has a purpose of its own in the sentence. In regard to the theme of Abschied, the last movement of Mahler's Lied von Eder, and on the irregularity of the initial theme in Richard Strauss' Sinfonia Domestica, which he considers composed by an indivisible unity of 5 bars, and in the same work another theme consists of unities of 2 and 1 bars. They are all conclusive about the correct characteristics of musical prose: irregularity and continuous development of ideas. Perhaps of more importance to this text is Schoenberg's illustration of extracted cello part in Serenade in his own Pierrot Lunaire, Opus 21. The units consists of irregular changes of 1 or 2 bars with different motives and elements. Etc. Another example is extracted from Der Krank Mond of Pierrot Lunaire. Only the flute line shows a surprisingly lack of phrase irregularity. In fact, if we have the quarter note as unity, we may identify a phrase of 9, 8, 2, 3, 2, 6, 5.5 quarter notes in length. The resulting effect is of continuous development, lacking the clear motivic relationships that are characteristic of Schoenberg's music, and again, tempo established the connection. In a letter to Busoni dated from August 1909, Schoenberg argued for and spoke of his plans to compose music by pure instinct and devoid of connotations of regularity, motivic coherence, and rhythmic symmetry, and with a constant change in mood. He summarized these ideas in the letter saying, "I strive for complete liberation from all forms, from all symbols of cohesion and of logic. Thus, away with motivic working out, away with harmony as cement or bricks of a building. My music must be brief, concise, in 2 notes, not built, but expressed. It should be an expression of feeling, as our feelings, which bring us in contact with our subconscious, really are a no-false child of feelings and conscious logic." A first option of the form perceived after these considerations and inner hearing activation is illustrated in Table 1, where you have an A of 3 measures of presentation and 1 measure of cadential event. So you have the 3 measures of presentation, and I'll play just the cadential event for you to know what we mean by that. And then we mean something else. So you have A as the first event, representing the point of rupture with what comes before, pieces 1 and 2, and then the introduction to the unpredictable events which come after. It's solid, expressed as a whole idea until 3.2 from 3. The cadence for the next measure sounds like the closure of this idea, as you heard. Then you have section B. Initiates in a totally different mood and can be regarded as a collection of different events, changing tempi. Different as they sound, they are connected and make perfect sense. Revealing a story to be told, justifying the title Connected Disconnection. And again, I make reference to the fragments mentioned by Galassi in this lecture. Elements which imply a cadence, don't establish a final closure of phrases, all just after you have this rupture, you enter here in this new sequence of the events, which for me is section B. And then you can feel this like a cadence, but there is always this connection that stays. And this kind of connection is made either stepwise or by the relationship that sounds like tonic. So just after that, and then you're going to see marked in green, like in the bottom of the phrase, the ways we hear the step motion wise. this former scholar, musician, who used to write for Courrier Musical in France, and he always explained the acceptance of Debussy's music by the fact that below the dissonance movement, he always had some stepwise motion and this relationship between dominant and tonic, which held people together, held the hearing together, and helped people feel comfortable with whatever dissonance were happening over there. In this piece, as a performer, we find ourselves looking for this kind of connection so that we can push the discourse forward. And that's what I tried to show you with my red lines there. However, so apart from that, I have found other connection strategy upon the observation of my own hearing while practicing. Step motion, intervals of fifth, which suggests dominant tectonic. That's what I just said to you. Relationships in certain crucial points of probable disconnection. So when you feel that it's going to disconnect, we connect. Okay. These two aspects illustrate phrasing throughout shifting the center of gravity. Different points of view put together begin to sound connected to each other, not because they have anything in common, but because they are part of the same discussion, the same line of thoughts or musical discourse, even of a musical prose. The analogy established by Claude Elfer with Pierrot Lunaire's Du Kreutzer, or the idea of Barrios sequency, exploring the relationship between the instrumentalist and its own instrument, as one single being applies. It can be different ideas presented by different people about the same subject, or one single person considering in her mind or his mind different points of view about the same subject. The pianist begins to consider these short events as powerful inputs, building a whole and exciting musical plot out of it. The second option of the formal segmentation of Opus 11, number 3, would be based on the events illustrated in table 2. So, in table 1, we saw an A with 4 measures, and then the B, and then the C, I told you, and then the coda. Second option has the same 4 measures for A, and then you have a transition, and I'll show you with the score. As you can see, this was really a conjoint work, and we were open to as many possibilities as we had, and we found many, many perspectives of the same piece. So you have the same A formed by recurrent elements, separated, because then we're going to see that the recurrent elements are elements which we will find during the piece. So you have the six 8-note groups that I already showed to you. Then you have da-da-da-dum, dun-da-da-dum, that you're going to see later. And then the pa-pa-pi-pa-pi-pa-pa-pa. And then the green one is a cadential event. Okay, so all the cadential events are marked by Professor Judek in green. That's the one I showed to you. Then what I considered B, here is considered transition. Then you have 5 measures of transition, and then 2 measures of a connecting element, and then the cadential element. And then B begins here. The section B begins with another full presentation of the second idea. The section is articulated by 3 cadential events. Which are marked there. And I already played. Then you have another transition, which I considered part of B as like a second thought. And here is considered as a transition. It's mainly defined as such by its abrupt change in texture density. The indication mesic also points towards a change of mood, which does not fulfill the function presentation of a new idea. And interesting enough, a connection to Brahms, who used it to anticipate the following section in the bridge. So section C would begin there, in Messi. The third section, yes, we agree with that, presents a full functional third idea, punctuated by recurrent elements, as you can see there. The three recurrent, from ta-ta-ti-ta-ti-ta-ta-ta, the fuse there. The first one is the recurrence of my 8-note group, and these two are recurrency from that one. Pa pa pi pa pi pa 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 pa. Okay. And then you have the coda. The coda begins with a complete liquidation of texture and rhythmic direction. The last event in the piece is closing without the full cadential function. As shown above, and in tables 1 and 2, the concept of musical prose is highly active in the piece, and it can be easily observed by the fragmentary change of moods, or in other words, by the connected disconnection of recurrent elements, cadential events, transitions, etc., all of them arranged in the work in a logical way, contrary to Schoenberg's argument in the letter to Busoni, where he claims a liberation of all traditional elements. See above. It could be affirmed that the thematic and atonal language of Opus 11, number 3, is in fact surprising. However, it's not devoid of traditional articulation, cadential events, transitional elements, and presentational ideas. After all, these elements are part of the musical discourse per se. The map of events illustrates all these aspects in a graphic presentation. So I will conclude showing to you a very brief resume of the piece. So you have what we call the recurrent elements. The very first one, and then the second one. Here, the example number 9 are the group of 16 notes. Example number 7, as you can see in the upper line, is the recurrency of this one. Da, 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 pam, 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 pam. And then the cadential events, the one I played already. Da, da, pam, 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 pam. The other two I gave as examples in section B, right? And also the final coda, which is closing event, and it's not considered as a cadential event because it doesn't sound like that, but it closes the piece. Then you have the transitional events, which is the one which, even if you don't consider it's part of B or not, it's a transitional event. And then the one who happens in measures number 8, which I show you by the connection in step motion. Here. And finally, the one in measures number 22, 24, where you can see here the relationships, and I played it to you, the relationship between feeling like dominant tonic. And I hope this was really a very good preparation to what we are going to hear in the masterclass. I leave you with the reference. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
interesting ideas. I just comment very shortly some. First, you spoke about the structure, and you had the first vision, old vision that structure is the skeleton, some kind of, which of course was denied by Levi-Strauss and others in the debate on formalism. So that, but that idea of structure as skeleton stems from Hegel again, because Hegel said spoke about the structure as leblose Knochen eines Skeletts. But anyway, like Levi-Strauss put it, structure is the form, is the content organized in a certain way. So it's always linked with the content as well, as you said there in your speech. So, but then this musical approach is fascinating because in Schoenberg, you quoted Schoenberg's idea that for him prose means to express the ideas very clearly and very straightforwardly. So for him it was something semantic, obviously. But if you think this Wagnerian origin of musical prose, like Hermann Danuser has his book about musical prose in Wagner, and also in Marcel Proust we have musical prose, which is Wagnerian. Then we have the syntactic definition of musical prose, which means the syntactic, how you put signs one after the other. And so I found very fascinating the two characteristics, irregularity and the continuous development of ideas, which are just something syntactically relevant, I would say, and very close to what I call organic narrativity. So you go beyond the very strict categorical musical form analysis like this, with segmenting things, and you strive for continuity, continuous in musical prose.
Yes.
So it's fascinating. And on the other hand, you speak about prose and not poetry, because if poetry would presuppose just the meter and versification.
Yes.
Whereas in prose you are free. It's like freely flowing discourse, so to say.
Yes, and it's fascinating because there is not much written about this piece particularly, and the ones we found are written by Schoenberg himself, by people like Adorno and people who think about, and not many theorists and many pianists, and all of them somehow make reference to Pierrot Lunaire. Because this changing of mood and changing of subject, like every two measures in section B, reminds us of this that self-dialogue that we hear in some pieces of Pierrot Lunaire. It's very, very incredible. So not many people have written, but what they have written somehow makes sense to everybody. So we hope to continue this research and make it a larger paper with more information from all the different perspectives that we've been finding. There are many.
I have also basically one is more a comment than a question really, but I would like to know if you agree with it. When you mentioned, for instance, and talking about the continuity, the idea of the fluidity of a discourse, the musical discourse, when you appoint that there is this relationship of a seconds,
yeah,
which is really very interesting, because when we think about the traditional tonal music, I mean, there is of course the sequences of seconds stepwise. I mean, even if you go back to the counterpoint, the modal counterpoint, which was considered to be the smoothest movement and the best one for the conduction of the voices. And then, of course, it turned into the instrumental writing as well. So just to, I think this is what you intended to say, that even here, you still have this conduction of a seconds that makes for a point of guiding yourself in the performance.
Yes, because what happened is that this time, like, we tried to apply, like, first thing you look, as I showed to you, is like something that you can, it's recurrent element that can, you look for unity, but there is no unity in this sense. So the 16 notes are very perceivable, but doesn't help you as a point doesn't support you in the prose. You just perceive it many times, and you remind, oh, this is the 16, the 8-note group. But this is not, you cannot. It doesn't characterize as something that is going to lead your analysis towards a performance. And then, of course, there is counterpoint, and there's counterpoint in the very beginning, wonderful counterpoint, but then you cannot apply it to the rest of the piece. So there is all the traditional resource of analysis doesn't show. I could even tell you, oh, I've found so many seconds, and I would do a Schenker graphic. You cannot do a Schenker graph of this one. So finally, what we found is that we tried to connect in our hearing through all this motivic and little details like that will help you construct a storytelling, because that's what the performer is doing. I mean, probably an analyst would try it with other strategies, but in this case, both the analyst and the performer relied on musical prose, because that's the only thing that makes sense here. And that's what's fascinating about this piece.
I was also curious if, for you personally speaking, I mean, when thinking of performing the piece, because of this richness of the approaches from yourself and from Professor Dudecki, I mean, if you, because when, for instance, when you mentioned that where he saw a bridge, you saw it as
a bridge. Just considered the bridge as part of B, and he considered it just as a bridge. You know, I was already there in the middle of that self-dialogue and discussion and changing of mood, and he considered it a transitional part to go into section B. So this would like change. If you want to do an analogy. With language, you would, with a text, you would like change a paragraph there, perhaps, and I would not. But it doesn't make, you know, the important thing is that we are hearing the basics to construct a musical prose, and it doesn't need to be the same thing. Unanimity is stupid, as you know.
Any more comments? I would actually like to ask you something. As a performer, you mentioned, well, as an analyst, you mentioned how important the changes of mood are in guiding through your analysis that have, as we have seen, maybe so different according to different perspectives, different authors analyzing. As a performer, I always felt with Schoenberg that this purely atonal period is very difficult to seize. And for me, and again, this is a purely empirical, I'm just, you know, thinking as a performer. I feel that when in this kind of language, it's very difficult because he really tries to make all notes equal and elude a sense of a tonal center. It's very difficult to create an auditive image of what we're playing, and that makes the learning process slower. And I personally think that those cues he gives you about changes of mood are crucial, and you really need to stick to them.
Yes.
Just so we can get over at least the first stages. And I was wondering if you agree with that.
No, of course, because as you see, although the other two are very for instance, as a tone as it would sound, you go. You're going to discover that you will go, like the next change of tempo begins. So somehow you begin feeling that you have a connection, because all the time you are going to find something that reminds you of how you begin. And you have an A prime. Okay, then second piece, you have this all the time. That no matter what happens, you will feel safe when you return to this or to that reminds you from where you begin. Right? So as a tonal So when you never turn a page without having met at least 3 times the same figure. You feel safe to conduct a discourse. Whereas Opus 11, number 3, has nothing that repeats. Absolutely nothing. So, and then we came out with this idea of the Pierrot-Lunaire thing that you were talking with itself, and I mentioned the Barrio Sequenza number 3 for Singer, that she's speaking to herself, and it's like a little bit like that. And we found many references to Pierrot-Lunaire in all the analysis we've looked for, because that's the feeling. You're changing mood, and then it makes sense for you because you are deluding or something like that. So you have to go in the spirit and have all these ideas and make them yours, and then connect them to be able to tell the story. And also the idea of the connection by step motion, which works, you know.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
We're going to continue now with a presentation about piano pedagogy in the beginning of the 20th century by Professor Sarah Davis-Buechner of the University of British Columbia, also performing pianist of greatest caliber, I would say. And I would like at this point to thank once again everybody that came and participated. We're very lucky to have had all of these presentations, of which now we're going to listen to the last one before we start the masterclass.